Alrighty, so in this video we're going to go ahead and fix up our platforms. So originally when I was cutting up the sprite sheet, I named this guy Dirt, but it turns out that this object was really, the sprite was really intended to only be a platform. It wasn't really intended to be a tile that we put onto the level. And that was just a slight communication disconnect between programmer and artist, which, happens sometimes.
Also a visual disconnect because I sat there and watched you make it, and I designed the level. I knew you didn't need it. So I don't know what happened.
Yeah, but you know what? This is a great example of the flexibility of the sprite editor in particular. Going in and modifying your sprites is actually very easy to do. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to delete the dirt prefab, and I'm also going to delete the dirt grass prefab, because this prefab is what's making it impossible for us to change the pivot point of our dirt object. The reason it's making it impossible for us to do that is because the grass itself has a pivot point that's going to be different than, see, it has a left pivot point. And if we have a left pivot point here and a center pivot point here, when we scale this object up, we're going to have a disconnect. So we need to make sure that when we make composite objects with sprites that they have the same pivot points. Because of that, that makes this object now impossible if we want to be able to scale our platforms up and down. So I'm just going to come in here to dirt, and I'm going to click on dirt grass, and I'm going to delete both of them. And then it says you cannot undo this action, but that's fine, and I'll hit delete. Okay, the object still lives inside of our hierarchy, but it's now disconnected from the prefab because the prefab has been deleted. You'll see that up here because it's now red. I'll go ahead and remove that object entirely. Because we're also going to be reconstructing our platforms, I'm going to remove both of the platforms that we've created from our hierarchy. And I'm also going to delete the platform prefab because we're going to be recreating the platform prefab. So I'm going to delete that. Okay, so I've now undone all of the things related to those three prefabs. The last thing I want to do before we go and we recreate the appropriate platform prefab is to go into our textures, locate our texture atlas main, click on sprite editor, and locate our dirt sprite. But I want to rename this because this is no longer a dirt sprite. This is now specifically, it's now a platform sprite, and that's the only place that we're going to use it. And I want the name to reflect that. So I'm going to rename it platform. In addition, I'm going to change its pivot to center. So now the platform will scale on the center, which is exactly what I want. Now remember, because I've made changes to the sprite sheet, I'm now going to come up here to the top right and hit apply. Once I hit apply, all those changes will be reflected in our project. And we can see that down here on our texture atlas main that we now have a platform texture. And we no longer have a dirt texture. So that's exactly what we want. Now let's go ahead and construct the platform. So I'm going to jump back into the scene view and I'm going to create a platform prefab. To do that, I'm going to click and drag my platform texture out into the level and I'll get a platform. Next up, I'm going to add a component, box collider 2D, to it so that we now have a box collider on it. Then I'm going to add a rigid body to it. That's a rigid body 2D specifically. That's because platforms are going to be moving, and since they're moving, they can't be a static collider. Otherwise, the internals of Unity might get a little confused about the location of this object. So we need to tell Unity that we want this object to be moving. We also want to make sure that isKinematic is true. That's because we're going to be handling the movement of our platforms entirely ourselves, and we're not going to depend on the physics simulation of Unity. The last thing that we need to do is add the the follow path script. That's what I want. The follow path script will be on almost all, or pretty much all of our moving platforms, since this is a moving platform. In fact, I want to go ahead and rename this object moving platform instead of platform. Sound good?
Sounds perfect.
All right, let's go ahead and prefabify it. I'm going to come up here in hierarchy. I'm going to click and drag on moving platform, and I'm going to dump it into prefabs, just the parent prefabs folder. So now we have moving platform there. And now we have this as a prefab. Now let's go ahead and add it to the two places that we need it. Before we do that, we do need to make one more change to our prefab. We need to come up here to layers and make sure that it's on the platform layer. Once we do that, we need to apply our, you'll notice that the apply button didn't appear until I unclicked off our platform and then re-clicked back on it. But once we change the layer, we have to make sure to apply so that all objects instantiated from this prefab will be on the platform's layer. Now that I've done that, that actually makes things a whole lot easier. Let me see. Why is it not letting me move? Move. Okay, Unity is freaking out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete the moving platform. Wow, the moving platform doesn't move. And then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to re-add it to the scene. And we're still not able to move it anywhere. So that's kind of weird. What's going on with this? Let's see here. We have it enabled. It's on layer platforms. The platforms layer is not locked. As you can see, we can move all of the other objects that are, or no, we can't move the sprites. So that's a really interesting little bit of Unity logic that's going on here. So let's take a look at why that is. If we look at our platforms should not be locked, and they aren't. If I go to sorting layers, or layers, we see that platforms is right there. It's not locked. So this might actually be in... Oh, well, that's interesting. I did not know this. I learned something new today. If the sprite renderer component is not expanded, you cannot move a sprite.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
That's a weird little functionality.
Yeah, so just make sure that your sprite renderer is indeed open when you move your platforms. Also, by opening the sprite render, I realized that I want to set the sorting layer of the platform to foreground. And then because we made a change, hit apply, so that it applies to all of our prefabs. Anyway, if you want to move a sprite, make sure sprite render is open.
Yeah, that little piece of information was worth the price of admission alone.
Yeah, okay.
That could be really frustrating.
Yeah, I seriously thought I was running into a Unity bug for a second, which unfortunately happens sometimes. Okay, so we have our moving platform 1. Let's go ahead and add it. Well, let's do the bottom one first, which that's platform path 1. Let's open up my follow path script and move platform path 1 onto path and give it a speed of 10. So now this moving platform is platform path 1. Let's click on this and duplicate it and move it up. And then let's add platform path 2 to its path. And then set its speed to 5. Because remember, path 2 uses linear interpolation as opposed to the move towards. Okay, so now these have box colliders, and they have rigid bodies, and that's exactly what we want. And they're on the layer platforms, and their sorting layers set to platforms. So that pretty much is the complete errata for our platforms. If I hit play, we'll see that our platforms move just like they did before. And you'll notice that their pivot point, I didn't have to add the platform as an arbitrary child to a parent, because now the pivot point of the sprite itself is set to the center, meaning that's the exact behavior that I wanted. Okay, so I think that just about wraps this video up. All we really did was we removed a couple prefabs that were preventing us from doing what we wanted with this sprite. We modified the sprite to have a different pivot point, and then we recreated our platform prefab. So in any case, this is just good practice for making changes to your sprites and your prefabs after the fact, after you have already created them.
Awesome.
All right, I think this just about wraps the video. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how we're going to handle user input and how our controller of our character is going to pass information into our character controller.